time for the meet and greet. Meet and greet. It's time for the meet and greet. Meet and greet. Proceed to the meet and greet.
Hello everyone, this is Gargi from Asavari's Meeting Show 29. Once again with Aaron Spring, and he is our star speaker. Welcome Aaron in Asavari's Meeting Show 29, and I want you to say something about yourself. Please introduce yourself to our audience.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. My name's Aaron Spring. I am a community servant and philanthropist within the Westchester community. I'm also an elected official on the Austin Board of Ed. However, I am here as a private citizen, and I am happy to be on the show. We have a lot to discuss today.
Right. So our first topic of discussion is President's Day message. So Mr. Biden, our president, the commander-in-chief, said that he has created 6 million new jobs, more jobs in 1 year than at any time before, and the unemployment rate has dropped to 3.9%, which is almost 4%. Wow. Amidst this pandemic and the war in Ukraine, what would be your President's Day message to the nation, imagining as if you are the current Commander-in-Chief?
So I think there's a few ways to look at this. One, we had a great resignation going on in this country over the summer and up until October. Many people left their jobs. So a lot of people who then filled roles were not necessarily people who were out of the workforce for a long period of time. They were people who had just left one job and gone to another. So I think it's important to note 6 million is great, but how many were actually newly created jobs versus people just resigning from one job and moving to the other. As for the unemployment, President Obama, President Trump, and President Biden love to tout unemployment numbers, but we have to remember, once people stop looking for work, I believe it's after 8 consecutive weeks, they are no longer counted under the unemployed number. So there's plenty of people who are out of the workforce who just stopped looking for work. So we have the unemployment number, to me, is not actually a good indicator of the economy. Rather, we should look at how many people are working of working age from 18 to 65. And I think that rate, labor participation rate, is a much better indicator of the economy than unemployment, simply because once you stop looking for a job after a certain number of time, you're no longer counted in the unemployed category. Unemployed people are people who are looking for a job. So I always look at these numbers when President Trump used to talk about it, now President Biden, and I always look at it with a bit of a grain of salt, if you will. In terms of the State of the Union and the President's Day message, I'm all for the positive and highlighting the good, but the State of the Union to me is a show, and they need to focus on the bad and the ugly. I mean, we have a terrible outlook in terms of our debt and our deficit. Over $30 trillion in debt. Our deficits continue to grow. We had a record deficit last year. We have 23% of this country cannot read. They are illiterate. We have 600,000 people living on the streets, 10% of which served our country. So yes, we're the richest country on earth. We have a lot of good things going on, but we have a lot of negative things going on. And I think we need to highlight that, not to make anybody look bad, not to make anybody lose votes, but because these are real issues. If somebody can't read, and again, 23% of our country is illiterate, of our adults, if somebody can't read, how can we expect them to work and be a functional member of society? So I think we need to take a step back, Democrat and Republican, and focus on some of these fundamental issues that we're going to be handing down to the next generation. Again, $30 trillion in debt. I mean, that's scary, very scary stuff. Somebody's going to have to pay that back eventually. And as deficits continue to go up, that's going to be a problem for inflation. That's why I love Bill Clinton. He balanced the budget. He had a surplus in his time as president when he was working with Newt Gingrich, Speaker of the House. So can we get back to that? Can we have surpluses instead of deficits? And I think that's where we need to start. So my message is, things are good in America. Don't get me wrong, we're much better off than many people, just having food on the table, clothing on our back, a roof over our head. But we need to get on some of these other issues like literacy and economics, if we want to continue to be a global dominant power, because there's no reason 23% of our adult population cannot read.
Right. So coming back to the State of Union, I mean, some journalists think that Biden's first State of Union was a mere patch job, not a repair job, okay? So a script written somewhat hastily. Something, in fact, a lot of important things were missing in his speech. So my question to you is that how would you see that, and how could you make it better with more input and content?
Well, I think President Biden gave a unifying speech, but I do think, like you said, it's more of patchwork. He realizes the country is very divided, and now with a lot of foreign policy issues, the country needs to come together, because if we can't even come together at home, how can we solve some of these foreign policy issues? So I think the unifying message is good, but we need to highlight reality. I mean, gas is almost $4 a gallon. Actually, it is $4 a gallon in parts of New York, and national average is over 350 now. Inflation continues to haunt us. I mean, people trying to buy used cars now can't even buy used cars because the price is just going up so much. So I think we need to highlight the economic realities, and work to actually bring down inflation, stop printing out money we don't have, and work further towards creating jobs that we are lacking in. What I mean by that is we have a shortage in this country in the next few years of almost 50,000 electricians, almost 50,000 plumbers. And you can't just, become a plumber overnight. You need to go to trade school and vocational school. So I think we need to invest more in education, invest more in the youth, and invest more in apprenticeship to bring back a blue collar workforce, as well as a manufacturing workforce, and incentivize these companies to invest more in this country and open up more factories here. Also, because when you open factories in this country, we have all these emission standards, and we have environmentally friendly standards that can then be followed, that are not necessarily being followed by these companies in other parts of the world. So my message would be, let's unify. But we need to get back to basics. We need to push trade school again. We need to get our tradespeople back here. We need manufacturing back here. We need education again. And we need to unite as Americans, because, again, if we're divided, we can't tackle some of the big issues. And some of the big issues that we're going to be talking about in just a few minutes cannot be solved unless the American people are behind it 100%, in my opinion.
Today is the National Employee Appreciation Day, and as you said that jobs are created, but many people, they have lost their jobs too. So I don't know what to say, that we should really appreciate our employee, but regarding the job situation, what would you say to the employees?
Many people left their jobs because they were unhappy with their work environment, or they were unhappy with their pay, or they were unhappy with the way they were being treated. So there was an article out in the Wall Street Journal the other day, and it said, bosses, you're not as well liked as you think. Something to that extent. And it's true. This is Employee Appreciation Day. And in a time where our labor shortage is so high, because people don't want to take these jobs, not because there aren't workers, but people don't want to take these jobs, we need to do more to help them. Use the market to your advantage. I don't believe in government institutions dictating minimum wage, but I do believe if a company is thriving, it should trickle down to the employees. A CEO does not need a 15th yacht, or a private jet. A 15th private jet. You can give your employees a couple more bucks an hour, and believe me, they'll be very happy. Every $1 an hour more that you make is an extra $2,000 a year. So if people go from $15 an hour to $18 an hour, that's an extra $6,000 a year. I would be very happy if somebody gave me an extra $6,000 a year. I'm my own boss, but if I did work for somebody, that would make me very happy. So on Employee Appreciation Day, we should remember employees are leaving their companies in droves. They're resigning, partly because of underpayment, partly because of their work environment, partly because they're being worked too hard. So we need to take a step back and say productivity and morale are more important than just checking off boxes. Did this person work 40 hours this week? Sometimes it's better if they work 35 if it means they're going to be more productive. A happy employee is a productive employee at the end of the day.
Right, exactly. I cannot agree more, because you have said the best thing. So now let's talk about the current situation. So people can see that we have dressed up in yellow and blue, which is symbolizing the flag of Ukraine. And Ukraine has blue on the top and yellow at the bottom. So blue symbolizes the sky and calmness, and yellow symbolizes the wheat fields and joy. So that's what the blue and the yellow stands for. So our first topic regarding the Russo-Ukrainian crisis and involvement of NATO is as follows. NATO, or North Atlantic Treaty Organization, is a group of 30 member countries that agree to work together to ensure the security of the Northern Atlantic area. NATO's purpose is to guarantee the freedom and security of its members through political and military means. Ukraine is a NATO partner country, which means that it cooperates closely with NATO, but it is not covered by the security guarantee in the alliance's founding treaty. So my question to you is NATO being helpful to Ukraine and in negotiating with Russia, who is not a part of NATO? Now, the only NATO members that were part of the Soviet Union are Baltic states like Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, and probably Poland, right? So is it hard for NATO to convince Russia and bring it to the table for any negotiation?
So, I mean, so far, NATO has provided humanitarian aid and military aid to the Ukrainians, but we have to kind of look back and see where these NATO countries are in terms of contributing to NATO. For years, the Eastern European nations, such as Poland, as you mentioned, Latvia, they were giving 2% of their GDP toward NATO spending. The other countries more toward the West, like France and Belgium and Germany, were not up to 2%. Under President Trump's administration, he really pushed them to get to 2% of their GDP being spent on NATO spending. So now that the Western nations have stepped up, and I commend them for that, France and Germany and these other nations in the West that are contributing that 2% now, I think NATO's flowing much better. There's less burden on some of the Eastern states. There's less burden on even the United States because we weren't paying our fair share. We were paying more than our fair share. So NATO has done a good job in terms of supplying. I don't think NATO has done a good job in terms of getting Russia and Ukraine to the negotiating table. Right now, it's I believe the negotiations are still being held in Belarus, actually, and it's a Ukrainian delegation, a Russian delegation. But NATO does not seem to be pushing their own delegation to kind of mediate. And you've seen other nations. China has mentioned they'll mediate. Israel has said that they would mediate. How come NATO is not mediating? So that to me is a little weird. If they really wanted to stop Russia, they should be the ones trying to mediate this, because right now they're giving the aid to the Ukrainians, and I'm for that. But at the same time, you're fueling a war by doing that. So, if NATO really wants peace, I think they should be the ones trying to help mediate. Emmanuel Macron, the president of France, spoke to Putin yesterday for an hour and a half, and all he said after was, the worst is yet to come. That's a problem when a major nation like France is president speaking to Putin and nothing's happening, and actually he's coming back and saying basically, the Russians are nowhere near done with their conflict. So NATO can do a better job by trying to mediate and trying to push more peace. But then again, Putin has to want to come to the table. If you've ever seen Putin speaking to his advisors or speaking to other nations, he speaks almost 30 meters away. He's at one end of the table and everybody else is all the way away. So that creates like this power dynamic. And Zelensky even said, President Zelensky said, I want to meet with you one-on-one, not 30 meters away, face to face. So I think NATO should push that too. So there's not this power dynamic that Russia is in control of these negotiations. It needs to be even, and NATO needs to take that step, in my opinion.
Right. Mr. Putin is too much protective about himself, I mean, as you say, that he maintains a distance, and that's not fair.
No,
Yeah, he
no,
should. Yeah, he should be a people's person rather than being a dictator, in my opinion.
absolutely, absolutely. You know, it's basic respect too. You know, if I'm having a meeting with you, it should be face to face. I shouldn't have to look like I'm walking into like a throne room and I have to bow down, because you're 30 feet away at the end of the table. It gives off this position of like you're better than me,
Mhm.
and I'm at your mercy. But it should be we're two sovereign nations. Let's have a face to face. I respect your nation, you respect my nation. Not I'm coming in here, oh holy Russia, please give me a moment of your time.
Sir, we are at your service.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
It should not be that. Yeah, too
And
much of
he
ego
even does
issues.
it. He even does it with his own military advisors. I mean, his military advisors come in as if they're. I mean, I guess they are serving him, but they're serving the country. But it makes it look like they're serving, only King Putin, if you will.
Yeah. Well, now comes a very crucial but very important point, which is the nuclear threat and cyber attack. So, regarding the nuclear threat, how realistic is Vladimir Putin's nuclear threat? Is Russia just terrorizing Ukraine? And also, I would like to know that can Russia mess or screw up with Ukraine's cyber security?
So I don't support Russia at all, or I don't support the Russian government. I do like the Russian people. I don't support the Russian governments, but I don't think that they're going to nuke the Ukraine. And here's why: they want to take over the Ukraine. They even said before they allowed this heavy shelling began, they wanted to take these cities intact. That's why they started with the cities, because they want the infrastructure to still be there for when they do take over, and they don't have to rebuild it. What I am worried about in terms of Russian nuclear weapons is if we strangle the Russian economy to the point that there's massive protests, that there's already starting to be protests, and these protests lead to an overthrow of the Russian government, and I'm not saying that it will, and I'm not endorsing that in any way, who takes over then? Putin is evil. He's terrible. But we know he knows that if he launches nukes, everybody else will launch nukes. If Putin falls because we have economically strangled them and caused mass riots and protests that take out the Russian government, who takes over? I'm worried about that. Just like with Bashar al-Assad, he's evil. He's a terrible dictator. But who comes next? That's something we need to ask ourselves. Sometimes the known evil is better than the unknown evil. So I don't think that there's a nuclear threat at the moment. I really don't. But I think if Russia becomes unstable to the point that there's a governmental change and we don't know who comes in, then I would be very, very terrified of something going down. You never know who could take over in a time of chaos, and that's part of the problem. Cybersecurity is also an issue, and there have been a ton of warnings about cyber attacks, even on our water supplies and electric grid, amongst other things. So that is definitely a real threat. I'm not a cyber security expert by any chance, but I do know that that's a real threat, more of a threat than nuclear war will be. But again, the nuclear threat to me exists if Russian government becomes destabilized. If Russian government stays the same, I don't think Putin is stupid enough to cause World War III through nuclear arms. I think he's stupid enough to cause World War III, but not through nuclear annihilation.
So regarding the cyber attack, I mean, the cyber security and cyber attack, I have one more question.
Mhm.
So it's kind of recent that members of the anonymous group have declared a cyber war against Russia. So what's your comment and opinion on that, about the
Well,
cyber war?
I think this is part of the reason why the stock exchange has to stay closed in
Hmm?
Russia. It has, there was a lot of sanctions, and that's part of the reason the Russians are staying closed, but also because of these cyber attacks. If they get hold of the Russian markets, there goes the economy in a heartbeat. It's already tanking as is. Anonymous is not one to be messed with. So if they're against you, you should be very worried. So I do think they're going to use it to manipulate and take down Russian defenses and Russian security, what do you call it, databases. But I don't think that they'll use cyber attacks to go after Russian civilians or after the electric grid or after the water supply. So I think Anonymous will act, but it will be strictly militarily or against military targets and not against civilian. Or at least I pray that that's the case.
That's an excellent answer, Aaron. I
Thank you.
really appreciate that you know how well read and how well educated you are. So now let's talk about the sanctions on Russia. Canada, the European Union, Japan, New Zealand, Taiwan, the United Kingdom, and the United States have unveiled a series of sanctions against Russia targeting banks, oil refineries, and military exports. The Western allies also said that they would impose restrictions on Russia's central bank to limit its ability to support the ruble and finance Putin's war effort. So, my question to you is how effective and powerful are these sanctions? Putin is so far rock solid in his agenda in spite of all this cyber security issues, then of course the nuclear issues and also the sanctions.
So I think sanctions are necessary against people like Putin and his billionaire allies. I think that it's very important. I worry about sanctions for ordinary citizens, which unfortunately sanctions affect ordinary citizens. Should a senior citizen in Russia who has nothing to do with this war now be forced to pay, 5 times as much money for a loaf of bread because inflation is through the roof over there? I don't think so. And to my last point, in terms of a destabilized Russia, economic uncertainty is a great way to destabilize Russia and cause a regime change. Again, I don't support Putin. I don't support his government, but I don't know what comes next. And because of that, I don't know how I feel about sanctions that destroy an economy that will lead to impoverishment, that will lead to hunger, that will lead to desperation, because what you don't want is a hungry and poor populace going out into the streets revolting. So I understand the sanctions, especially those against Putin himself and his friends. But when the sanctions hurt innocent people, it's a recipe for disaster. So I don't really know what the answer is when it comes to sanctions. And the other thing that's weird to me is we sanction just about everything except Russian oil. We're still taking in about a million barrels of Russian oil a day. What are we doing? That's they're directly profiting off of that. So we have all, people who are saying they stand with the Ukraine, but we're still buying Russian oil. So again, it's such a delicate balance, right? Because I don't want ordinary Russian citizens to be hurt, but that's what these sanctions are doing.
Well,
When
I was looking at the channels, TV channel and the news channel, and of course on internet that Russian people, they're protesting against Putin because they don't want, Ukrainian blood in their hands.
Mhm.
They have a lot of relatives and friends, those who live in Ukraine. And some Russians, they're also married to Ukraine, so they have like an emotional feeling attachment, whatnot. So Putin has put a lot of protesters behind bars, and it's just not working. I mean, all these sanctions. That's what my question to you was. That what are these sanctions doing? I mean, Putin is not coming on the negotiating table.
Yep.
He has not agreed on any kind of ceasefire. So it's not being effective. It's effective, but it is not affecting Putin, from taking any decision regarding a ceasefire, at least.
Right. And it's strange to me too, because a lot of people who are against the Cuban trade embargo, because of the impoverishment that it caused there, are for sanctions against Russia. You will create another Cuba by imposing all these sanctions because it's the ordinary people who are getting hurt. There has to be another way to go after Putin and his allies without hurting the average Russian citizen. Why should an average Russian citizen who's against the war, who's protesting in the streets, still be forced to bear the economic burden of their country's leaders? I don't believe in that. So we've talked about many times the theme of we need to separate the people from the government. And I think we've done a good job of that, throughout our series. And I want to say that again here, we need to separate the Russian people from the Russian government. And I don't think it's fair to economically burden to the point of almost, people might be losing their homes soon. People won't be able to afford food soon, and burden them for the actions of a madman. I mean, look at North Korea. All the sanctions we put in there, people are, starving the streets, eating rodents at this point. It's not fair to the people. So I like to see myself as a humanist, if you will. I believe in humanity, and I don't support the Russian invasion in any way, shape, or form. But I don't support the targeting of Russian civilians through economic matters. And is there a better answer? I don't know, but I don't think this is the answer.
Right. I mean, it is so heartbreaking to see some of the footages which are appearing, from Ukraine. That, there is kind of like a military draft ongoing because Volodymyr Zelensky, if I'm pronouncing it right, he has announced that nobody, I mean, a male person from between age 18 and 60, they cannot leave the country. So if needed, they have to join the army and military and fight for Ukraine against Russia. So the footages which are coming, some of them are still on YouTube. I mean, some of the people, they do not even have any kind of military training. And they were saying that we don't know whom to shoot because we both look the same, from that side and our side. And they do not have a military training. And it's like a complete mess, I would say.
Absolutely. But I commend them because I commend the Ukrainians, that is, because these are people I was reading, like, teachers and doctors and people who are not military people willing to take up arms to defend their nation. I really do commend it, but it's tough because you're not just going up against the Russian army, you're also going up against Russian mercenaries. There are 400 Russian mercenaries from the Wagner group who are in Kiev right now with orders to kill Zelensky. So first he was able to take out the Chechnyan mercenaries, but the Wagner mercenaries are notorious. For all the viewers, please look up the Wagner group when you get a chance. It's a paramilitary private organization that the Russians are using to get away with war crimes. And it's not an official Russian military. It's private. So they can get away with killing and raping civilians. They can get away with executions. They've done this in the Central African Republic, in Syria, in Mali now. I believe they're now going into more West African countries now that France is pulling out of the Sahel. So look up the Wagner group, because the Wagner group is committing atrocities against civilians, and you can't even bring them to criminal court in The Hague because they're technically, mercenaries are illegal in Russia. So if there's no trace of them, these crimes never happened. So I think it's sad to see that these citizens of Ukraine are up against not just the brute force of the Russian military, but the atrocities that are being pushed upon them by Russian mercenaries within the Wagner group, or Wagner group rather is the proper pronunciation, but it's spelled Wagner. So I urge people to look that up too, because they really are brutal. And I'll give you an example. They tracked down a Syrian soldier who deserted, and they beheaded him with a shovel. So this is the atrocities that they are going through. They were, raping women in the Central African Republic for being suspected Islamic spies, people who had never been involved in war in their lives, who had their whole lives just upturned and ruined because of suspicion by Wagner rebels. So this is insane that citizens have to take up arms against a Russian army, but it's also insane to me that the Russians are going to continue to get away with war crimes through private paramilitary groups, and nobody will ever be held accountable. So I really feel for the people who are victim to that as well.
Absolutely, so let's talk a little bit about pro-Russia and anti-Russia. So 87 countries either voted for or co-sponsored a draft in UN Security Council resolution deploring Russia's invasion of Ukraine, though Russia used its veto to block it. India and the United Arab Emirates, UAE, also abstained, while Brazil, another swing vote, joined the US-led condemnation. The Signatories to the resolution include nearly all of Europe, several countries in Latin America, and US allies Australia, Japan, New Zealand, and South Korea. Cuba, Iran, and Venezuela have claimed the US and NATO are responsible for the current crisis, but virtually no world leaders have endorsed Russian invasion. So my question to you is, how far do you think that this war will go? Will Russia agree for a ceasefire, since there has been a huge economic loss and a sheer defamation of Russia?
Well, Russia's goal is to have full control of the Black Sea. So I don't think they're going to back down until that happens. And I don't see them backing down. Notice that they're going after cities that speak Russian, mostly Russian speaking cities. Kherson is one of them, for example. They truly believe, and Putin even talked about this in many of his speeches, that they're not Ukrainian. They believe that they're Russian cities, and they believe that they're Russian people. So I don't see him stopping until they take the full Ukraine, personally. And if you take Ukraine and then you take Moldova, then you have full control of the Black Sea, and there's no chance of anybody ever invading from the Black Sea from the south. So strategically, militarily, I think that makes sense for him. And I think people are watching, because they're watching to see how we react to the Ukraine being taken over, because this could be a spiral for China going into Taiwan, or, and I've been saying this for months, or Russia then going into the Baltic states, as you said, or Finland, who's not a member of NATO, or going into there. Although if we remember from 1939, the Finnish beat the Russians when the Russians invaded during the Winter War. So I don't see him stopping until the Ukraine is taken over, and possibly even going into more countries. And then I could see China going into Taiwan. Notice that also with that resolution you spoke about, many African countries either did not vote at all or abstained. Why? I think we're going back to the Cold War status of who has influence over Africa. Is it Russia or is it America? And I think the African countries are watching very closely to see who comes out on top here, to see who they start aligning with. The Chinese are already investing billions and billions of dollars in Africa in infrastructure and buying up airports and roads and stuff like that. So we are at a silent war in Africa, if you will, over values. And we're going to see whether the African nations shift and continue or support America and the West, or whether they're going to go with China and Russia. And we saw only one country voted against the resolution, which was Eritrea, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. And about 20 something or so countries voted for the resolution, but many countries either abstained or didn't vote. That's a problem, because they're watching to see their neutrality is only existent because they want to see who comes out on top here. So I could see, again, Russia going into the full Ukraine, then taking over Moldova, because there's a huge Russian-speaking section of Moldova as well, having full control of the Black Sea area, and then trying to rebuild essentially what I'm going to call the Warsaw Pact. So we shall see what happens there, but Putin's not going to back down. If he stops now, he's never going to be taken seriously again, and everybody knows that.
Okay, I have one more question for you. The question is that the United States of America has a total of $3 billion which we have spent in support of Ukraine. Then our commander-in-chief, he has issued, this is very latest, that $350 million in support, in financial support of Ukraine. So how are we benefiting? Where do we stand?
So I think this is, and also, I don't know if you saw, but President Biden's asking Congress for another 10 billion now, or up to 10 billion. We're pouring water from an empty cup. And my heart and your heart go out to the Ukrainian people. I feel bad for them. I really do. I want to support them in any way I can. But this is pouring water from an empty cup. We're $30 trillion in debt. We don't have the money to help all these other countries. And is it the noble thing to do? I guess, but we can't afford this. We really can't. So it's not necessarily benefiting us. I think, again, these countries in NATO that were not pushing 2% of their GDP towards NATO, for years, they have some room to make up here because they weren't doing it for years up until 2020, 2021. So for these countries that have gotten a free ride for 30, 40, 50 years, they should be the ones pumping in more money. Germany and France, these are very rich countries. Let them finance some of these initiatives. We just don't have the money. This is like me cutting you a check for $100 when I have a negative balance in my bank account. It doesn't make sense.
It will bounce.
Yeah, we're printing out money that doesn't exist. We're borrowing money from the Chinese that we can never pay back. And it's not even helping Americans. And, we have plenty of Ukrainian Americans who live here in this country who are also in poverty. So we act like we want to help the Ukrainian people. We won't even help the Ukrainian Americans. So that I say that not to be cold or not to take away from the fact that there's humanitarian crises going on over there. But I just think that we need to look more for private donations. And there's been billions of dollars already being sent over there and donated by private individuals and corporations. And look to these richer Western nations in Europe who are directly affected by this and ask them to kick up some money, because quite frankly, we can't afford this. And I don't just say that with the Ukraine, I say that with many countries, and I'm very consistent on this. We have 600,000 homeless people here. We have all these students who can't read, who are living in poverty because their schools are not funded well. We have got to push in America. I'm going to say America first. I don't like to use that term because it's controversial. And, President Trump really took it and ran away with it. But we do have to put our country first. And that shouldn't be a Republican thing. It shouldn't be a Democrat thing. It should be an American thing. So it's tough because we want to support. And I privately donated, but taxpayer dollars that don't exist and we can't afford, I have trouble getting behind that. We're bankrupt. I'm 24, so I always talk about the children as if I'm not a child myself, but we're bankrupting the children at the end of the day, and it's not right.
Yeah, absolutely. Because if it's not bringing anything on our plate, we should not really make any false promises and try to create, money.
Yeah.
Yeah, we are just trying to, I don't know what kind of 3D printer or what kind of printer we have, or to issue those checks and create money, because our people need all the money, to make our country, to make America great again, to make our country great again, of course.
Right. And that's the other thing too, is like, we can sell the Ukrainians arms. I have no problem with that, because then it's, arms for money. That's fine. But just to keep giving money out, and it's not just Ukraine. There's all these countries that take advantage of us. NATO countries took advantage of us for years, and now they're finally paying their fair share. Enough is enough. We can support them, emotionally, morally, and we can support them monetarily with arms if they are going to pay for them. But to just, this is crazy that we're throwing away money that we don't actually have. And for people who don't think the debt and the deficit matter, look at inflation, because this is directly causing inflation. So, if you're okay with paying all this money for goods that cost way less just, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, we're at the point now where, you used to be able to afford a house with no college degree and only one person working within your family. Inflation and all this spending has caused it to the point that two people now have to work, and you're better off if you do have a college degree. But part of the reason things have shifted so much is because not that things have gotten more expensive, but that our dollar is worth less. So, anybody who thinks that inflation and deficits and debt is not a real issue, I just ask you to look at the price of a home in 1970 versus the price of a home today. The home didn't get more valuable. The dollar got worth less.
As you said, we are bogged into almost $31 trillion of debts and deficits. And I don't see that in the near future, any kind of recovery will happen, or the dents can be repaired. The economic dents, can be repaired. So on the top of everything, we are still spending tons of money and making all the false promises to our country that this is going to happen, that is going to happen. So stock market is extremely volatile. So you are in finance. So can you tell our viewers a little bit about the volatile market?
Sure. So, I mean, right now is just a good time to hold. We don't know what's going on with Russia and Ukraine. Well, we do know what's going on, but we don't know where this is going to end, right? And I talked about uncertainty a few weeks back on the show, or a couple months ago at this point. Um, and until uncertainty winds down amongst many factors, COVID, Ukraine, China, Taiwan, supply chain issues, until these uncertainty factors wind down, hold or invest in slow growth, high yield dividend stocks, because the market's just going to keep going like this. One bad day, one good day.
It's
And
like a roller coaster, you know. It's
it is. I want to ride it. If I could like get a roller coaster, like a stock market graph, it'd be kind of cool, you know. But I would not. Don't make any crazy moves right now, just because we don't know what's going on. We don't know if we're going to get pulled into a war. I pray we don't, but we just don't know.
Do you think that World War III may happen or can happen?
It definitely can. I mean, this is let's look at what caused World War One was alliances. It was all, one country invades another, and your friends back you up. What do we have now? We have alliances. If a NATO country is attacked under Article 5 of their treaty, of the treaty, all NATO countries are attacked. If one is attacked, all are attacked. So if Mr. Putin goes into the Baltic states, or he goes into Poland, automatically we are drawn into war. So it's not a far-fetched possibility. It's very possible. And we need to be worried about that, because we don't know where a lot of countries stand, and that's the problem. We have no idea where China stands. Again, we have no idea where a lot of these African countries stand right now. So it could be NATO versus Russia, and then God knows what could happen. We'll see world conflict all over. It's possible. The closer they get to Poland, and the more likely that they attack Poland, the more likely we get pulled into a war. But alliances caused World War One, and unfortunately, they may cause World War III.
I mean, my concern is the US economy. I mean, it's an already fallen economy. It's like a slippery slope. Things are so way concerning. I mean, there's a huge hike in the essential commodities, then gas price, I mean, fuel price. Then, of course, I mean, we are not getting much interest in the banks, from the banks. Then, people, those who are trying to invest some money in the real estate, they're getting a very big interest rate high. It's pretty high. So we are surrounded from all angles, from all corners, I mean, plus we have these huge debts and deficits. So, what's going to happen? What is the future of our country? What is the future of our country?
I mean, I urge people to invest right now in, again, high yield dividend, low growth stocks, as well as gold. Buy gold. I bought land. I urge people to buy land. I don't think we're coming to anything crazy per se, but I do think it's important to diversify your assets. Real estate, gold, stocks, not bonds. Bonds are good too. Don't just do one. Don't just do stocks. Don't just go buy a bunch of multifamily homes. Don't go and just buy a bunch of bonds. You need to diversify, because if one nest fails, you have all your other nests still going. Scary times, but as always, it's not a time to just keep cash under your mattress. Your dollar is not growing there. So you need to get it out of just these little, low interest savings accounts, get it into the market, into more safe, secure, again, low growth, high dividend yield, bonds. If you can afford real estate, get into real estate. If you can afford gold, get into gold. And that would be my advice to people. Uncertain times, diversify as much as possible.
Right. So, what about the precious metals stock?
Gold is up,
Oh,
So
really? It is? Oh,
yeah, gold is one of the commodities that really has not lost its value. There's actually a book on this, The Creature from Jekyll Island. And it talks in part about how gold really has not lost its value over thousands of years. Back in the Roman times, a bag of gold would buy you a nice toga and sandals, right? The best clothes that there were. Now a bag of gold worth, a few $1,000s gets you a nice Italian leather suit, and nice or Italian leather shoes and a nice suit. So same thing, right? Toga and sandals, suit and shoes. Same thing, a bag of gold, right? And it talks about this in The Creature of Jekyll Island, how gold really has not lost its value over the years, over thousands of years. So gold is typically a great asset, as is silver for that matter. Silver is a good asset too. So I don't own a lot of gold, but it's something that holds its weight and holds its value over time. And God's not making more of it, so definitely get it while you can. Same with land. I always tell people, God's not making more land. You buy some while you can. And try to monetize it. If you buy a few acres of land and plant, Christmas trees on it, 5 years you'll be making money off Christmas trees, and you won't even, you don't have to do much work. They grow by themselves through nature.
Well, with a lighter note, I would say that I completely agree with you, but I'm so much afraid of the water world. This is because, as a closing statement, I really want you to talk about climate change. There's a lot going on in the climate, a lot of environmental pollution, the gas and methane and whatnot. This war is creating so much of extra pollution, and the water level is rising, the ice is melting. It's extremely scary.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's something that definitely keeps me up at night. And I am a huge environmentalist. I clean the streets every Sunday, I pick up the trash. We've got to do better. It's the pollution, the fire. The Russians lit a nuclear power plant on fire yesterday. Thank God it didn't explode. It would have been worse than Chernobyl, 10 times worse than
Yes,
Chernobyl.
of course.
We have got to realize we're not the only species on this planet. We owe it to every other species. We owe it to the trees. We owe it to the oceans. We owe it to all the animals out there. We can all do something better. We can all either drive a little bit less. We can pick up trash off the street. We can use less, let's say anything really. If you're washing your hands, and you use, 5 scoops of soap, maybe use 3 this time, so you use less per person, right? Obviously, we want to be sanitary, but we can use less of soap. You might, instead of drying your hands with paper towels, dry your hands with a hand towel. So there's all these little steps we can take, because at the end of the day, climate change is destroying us. It's destroying our world. And if we don't step up and solve it, we are not going to exist. And people don't seem to realize that, which is very, it's like stupid, if you will. I hate, not to use that word, but it's stupid that we don't realize that this is what's happening. So I urge people to do a little bit less. If we all do a little bit less together, we will make a big, big, big difference.
Exactly, and recycling, and also the solar panels, using electric cars.
Yes, absolutely. All of these things can be used collectively. And
Mhm.
if we all do one thing, we don't have to all do a million things, but if we all do one thing, you'll see just how much of an impact we can have. Look what happened with COVID. When COVID first happened and everything shut down, it wasn't good, obviously, but a lot of the waterways cleared up. The dolphins came back in I think it was Vienna or
Exactly,
Venice, right?
exactly.
So like
Yes,
we're
yes, you're
clearly
right.
we clearly caused all this. And
Mhm.
anybody who doesn't believe that, just like look at the evidence. The evidence is there. So it's not that hard. I don't know. I feel like sometimes I'm like speaking to people who are just dumb, but it's very easy to just everybody do one thing. And the people, like I said, the people who don't believe this, in my opinion, they're dumb, and they should realize that this is their world, it's not my world, it's not it's our world. So you're going to be living in it when the climate changes.
Exactly,
We have
exactly,
to step up.
Yeah.
you know?
And acres and acres of lands they're burning in California, and sometimes fire is so much beyond control. Then, we all know about Amazon forest, and,
Well, that's
it's
the thing
really,
too, is there's a new study out that the Europeans are now using the goats and the sheep to do forest management. So I think we all need to take a step back, do things for our climate together, and just one thing. I'm not asking you to change everything. I'm not asking you to give up hamburgers. I'm not asking you to, go buy a Prius, but I'm asking everybody to do one thing. It's not that hard. Recycle, as you said, or eat, use less paper waste. This is take shorter showers. This is not that hard. Like we can do this. Like we're smart people. And the Europeans, to your point about forest fires, are using goats and sheep to actually eat some of the brush. to stop the what becomes tinder for the forest fires. So maybe we should do that. Use sheep and goats as forest management. Now it's a little easier over there
No
because
bonfire, right?
right. It's
Unless
easier.
bonfire, yeah. But yes,
it's
camping.
it's
Camping we
easy.
can do.
Yes, absolutely. It's easy in Italy for them to do, the forest management because they don't really have large carnivores to attack sheep and goats. It's a little harder here because in the forest we have wolves and coyotes and all these other animals. They don't really have that in Italy. But I do think it's important if we can monitor it safely to use goats and sheep to do essentially forest management and make sure that all that brush is not going to be lit up as tinder for an eventual forest fire. So just like there's these little things we can do and it makes a big difference.
Thank you so much, Aaron, for being at Asavari's meeting show. And I will see you again. I will see you very soon. You are our star speaker and you are coming every month with different topics of discussion. And I really more than appreciate your valuable time that you gave to Asavari today. And we have discussed so much and there is so much coming up. So we'll again see you very soon.
Thank
And
you.
take
I
care.
appreciate you having me. Hopefully the world's in a better place by the time we meet next month.
Yeah, of
I hope.
course,
We
I
pray.
pray. I'm keeping my 20 fingers crossed and I'm always praying to God, my God, your God, the Almighty God. That
Our God.
please,
Yes.
God, please, we need peace. I'm just
Yes.
praying, praying and
Absolutely.
praying.
Absolutely. So it's good to see you and thank you again.
Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Ты казала